Welcome to the Extraordinary Vets podcast, where we believe that every career tells a story. I'm your host, Donna Harris. I'm a veterinarian at Michigan State University and a futurist. My mission is to tell the stories of those creating the future of our profession. For today's guest, I have to get a shout out to Dr. Haley Gallagher, whose sister put me in touch with Dr. Lisa Freeman, a veterinarian, but more importantly, the 13th president of Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois. Welcome, Dr. Freeman.
Good morning.
Before we dig into your career, tell us about Northern Illinois. I know where it is, and I know a little bit because my daughter was at Kent State, which is you're in the same athletic conference. But tell us about the university. Do you have pre-veterinary medicine there? Just tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. NIU is a community engaged, high research activity public university. And what is most distinctive about NIU is the way we combine our research, innovation, and engagement missions with access. We serve about 15,000 students, about 12,000 undergraduates, and half of our student body, half of our undergraduate student body are first generation. Half are eligible for Pell Grant support, and more than half are from underserved and under-resourced communities. So we make sure that zip code doesn't determine your ability not only to receive a four-year education, but your opportunity to participate in knowledge creation and community engagement as part of that experience.
Well, that must feel really good to be a part of that kind of mission.
Yeah, we have 7 degree granting colleges. One is a college of law. The other ones are focused. We're all big universities are focused in business and in health professions, arts and sciences, visual and performing arts, education. I'm probably forgetting one, but you get the engineering. You get the picture.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of students who are interested in environmental science careers, conservation careers, some veterinary medicine careers, but we don't have a pre-veterinary science major. We have a small but active pre-veterinary club. And then we have students who are in other colleges who are really interested in the human companion animal bond. So for example, we had an innovation come out of our College of Engineering that won an award at a pitch contest. It's actually a robotic seeing eye dog. So we have things like that going
Really?
on. Yeah, and a lot of interest in animal behavior. We have some strong animal behaviorists who are really in our anthropology and our neuroscience departments.
The veterinary party must love that connection.
Of course.
Yeah, I bet. Well, let's go back to your beginnings. Were you kind of a science nerdy kid? Were you an animal kid? Or how did you find veterinary medicine? It was obviously the start of your pathway. So take us back take us back a little bit.
So I'm going to start very early, but I promise it won't take long to catch up. And I think it's important for you to know that I wanted to be a veterinarian from a very young age, the age of 3. And that's important because in 1963 and 4, when I was 3, there were no women veterinarians. I mean, that was a time in our profession when there were, basically they allowed 2 women in every veterinary class, so they could be lab partners. And what we see today is not what I saw in the veterinary profession when I was growing up. So then you may ask, like, well, then how the heck did you decide to be a veterinarian? And it was because I hated dolls. I loved stuffed animals. I kept getting things like stethoscopes. And as a result of that, I decided I wanted to be a veterinarian. And, that wasn't the most rational choice at 3, but it stuck with me. And as I went through high school and I shadowed veterinarians and I learned more about the profession, I always kept it with me that that was my first choice and I was going to pursue a veterinary career.
Well, you are so right about that. The society's expectations of male versus female veterinarians. You must have had some powerful people in your life that kept you believing that was possible.
I credit my parents. They always told me you can do things that you put your mind to. Don't aim low because others tell you that, you can't do it. Just, pursue your dream and hope that it will work out. Always kind of have alternative plans in the back of your mind. But if that was what I wanted to do, they wanted me to be able to do that. And I give them a ton of credit. They were not animal people, and yet their home was filled with creatures constantly. My mother covered her eyes during my horse shows because she was so afraid that I would die going over an oxer, but they were there for me.
I love it. Yeah. So you eventually ended up in Cornell. Shout out to Cornell's Veterinary School, great school, for your veterinary degree. But it sounded like, in when I was reading your bio, that you were kind of started down the research pathway from an early age. Tell me about that.
So I got involved in undergraduate research as a way to strengthen my veterinary school application. Um, at the end of my junior year, and this would have been, 1980, when, as a New York resident, Cornell was the only place that I could apply. It was a very different landscape. It was very competitive. You had a pretty much 1 in 11 chance of getting into veterinary school. And when I applied after my junior year, I was put on the wait list, which was a very good sign. But my two best friends, my study buddies, my, partners all through undergrad both got in. So suddenly I was facing my senior year, knowing I had a pretty good shot of getting in as after my senior year, having been put on the wait list, but I was kind of without my posse and looking for what I hadn't done yet to strengthen my vet school application. And so I got really involved in doing undergraduate research, and quite surprising to me, I just fell in love with discovery science, with the fact that you could ask a question that nobody knew the answer to and pursue getting the answer. And so by the time I was admitted to vet school, I knew that I wanted to keep one toe at least in some type of discovery science. And I looked to try for the next, 4 to 5 years to figure out what that looked like. Was it a graduate degree? Was it doing a residency and doing more clinically based research? Did I want to continue the research I started as an undergrad or do something different? So I definitely came in focused on being a comparative biomedical scientist and a veterinarian.
So you still thought about clinical medicine, even though you fell in love with the research aspect.
I didn't rule out having clinical responsibility as part of my career until I was in a PhD program at Ohio State. Um, I wound up completing a combined DVM master's at Cornell, in the area that I was doing my undergraduate research in. I wound up not doing a DVM PhD at Cornell because my research interest changed as I learned more about different fields of clinical medicine, and because it became just really hard to pursue a dual degree when there was no formal dual degree program. When I went to Ohio State, they gave me a great opportunity. They said, you have a real interest in research. You're trying to figure out, do you want to do basic science with or without adding in an anesthesiology or a cardiology residency? So why don't you take a year, do your coursework, start some experimental stuff, hang out with our anesthesia and cardiology residents, and then decide if you want to do a combined residency PhD or if you want to just pursue one path or another. They were great to me to let me figure it out. And as I started to work in the laboratory, I realized that cardiology was very patient intensive. I mean, you're reacting all the time to sick animals who deserve your attention. And my experiments were technically challenging, and balancing them with a clinical schedule in cardiology was just not going to work well for the pets that I would be taking care of or my experiments, which I cared about. Anesthesiology would have worked better. But in my personal life, my husband was doing a health service corps scholarship payback. So we lived quite a ways from Ohio State in rural Appalachian, Ohio. And I didn't go back and forth every night, but I went back and forth enough that, and I'm not naturally a morning person anyway, so that 4:30 to 5:30 anesthesia start time was like, I don't know about this. And
Yeah.
so I was like, I really like the lab, and I think I'm going to be happy doing that. I'll be a basic science faculty member at a vet school. And I think, I really felt too that more basic science faculty with DVMs who had some clinical experience were going to be really good for the profession too. And I
Yeah.
probably left this part out, but not surprisingly, between my husband's medical school debt and my vet school debt, we were living pretty leanly. And so Ohio State's on quarters and Cornell's on semesters. So between my graduation from Cornell and the start of my PhD program, I did relief work in a lot of
Mhm.
different practices in the southeastern Ohio area. I was well beyond, the non-compete 50 miles because
Yeah.
of where we lived with the university, and I found a practice that I loved. And so I worked there every Saturday. I took weekend call. I did, holidays like spring break and winter break all through my
Mhm.
PhD program. So I did have a good opportunity to be in clinical practice while I was getting my PhD. So when I stopped clinical practice and went really to consulting as a pharmacologist and being a basic science faculty member, I felt like I had good stories and good experience to share with the students I was teaching.
Yeah, you could relate.
I could relate.
So we have some listeners that are not necessarily in the veterinary field, but interested in it. So talk to us at some level that us non-researchers can understand about the research that you were so interested in.
I started out looking at how anesthetic agents, particularly the ones that are inhaled during surgery, affect heart rhythm. And I started out doing that at the level of kind of whole animals and tissues. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that I really liked very fundamental things that went on at the cellular level. Like I really, even as I looked at clinical cases that were puzzling, I liked to be able to go in my mind from what I was seeing as a clinical sign in an animal down to what might be happening at the cellular level, and then kind of back up through tissues, organs. And that was kind of the way I thought. And so I got really interested in ion channels in cells, because that's what the basic of electrical activity in the heart, the brain, and everywhere in your body is. You basically have almost like little batteries in all your cells where currents go back and forth. And that became the focus of my research. So as I moved through my career, I continued to study ionic currents in the heart for a long time, thinking of how those are responsible not just for adverse reactions to anesthesia, but adverse reactions to all kinds of drugs that might accidentally block a particular cardiac current. And then over time, as I collaborated more, particularly with some people in the clinic at Kansas State University, where I was a faculty member, I became interested in how ion channels in cells that we don't normally think of as excitable, like cells that cause ovarian cancer and cells that help heal ulcers, can also be important physiologically. So I think that, I took the research I started at Ohio State as far as I could, and continue. But I think because I was a veterinarian who cared about whole animals, I was also willing and able to see areas where there wasn't a lot of people doing research, but there might be some important things to discover.
I can visualize you on a Saturday or doing a weekend call and giving an animal a drug and your brain going down to the cellular level saying, I know what's going on down there, or I don't know what's going on down there and I want to figure it out.
And when I consulted too, that's always, if the clinic calls the pharmacologist, it's often like, hey, we have a camel with GI stasis, and there are no drugs labeled for camels. What do you know about like the cells in the camel's GI tract, and what should we try, and what might the consequences be? And
I
so
love that. And that makes it real, I'm sure.
it makes it real. It makes it fun for students too, because when you teach, you can weave these kinds of examples in. And the part of vet school that's often considered the most boring becomes a little less boring.
Oh, I love that. That's great. So you did your PhD at Ohio State, and you did a postdoctoral fellow. What is that? What's a postdoctoral fellowship?
So, because I was over time, as I kind of alluded to, becoming more and more aware that having a basic science lab was something I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure that I was going to be competitive with the people who had basic science labs who didn't spend a lot of time going to medical school or vet school. And in my field, I just needed a few more years of working with someone who knew how to fund a lab writing grants. And because I had a veterinary degree, I was able to be much better paid as a postdoc than I would have been without a veterinary degree. And I had basically a few years where my whole job was to do research. And it was great because I brought a perspective to the research group that had been absent from, the standpoint of really understanding comparative medicine. And the folks there, some of them had only trained on little tiny cells and had no perspective of what happened when those cells all came together to make a harder, ultimately an animal. And it was wonderful. It was really a very positive learning period for me. And because the reputation of that lab was excellent, when I started a faculty position, I was able to be successful with pretty much the first grant I wrote. And that allowed me to be secure in my faculty position as I launched my career in as a veterinary faculty member.
That's really good advice for young veterinarians who might be listening that are on the research track that are considering, do they take some time to do this fellowship? It gave you a good bounce, and then is that when you then transitioned to Kansas? You went.
Kansas State was my first faculty position.
Okay.
I went in 1994 and I stayed for 16 years. If you had told me I would be, 16 years at one place, I would have said, nah. But I interviewed for many jobs. I had a few offers. I had jobs at medical schools. I had job offers in medical school basic science department and biology department. But when I got a job offer from a veterinary school, it just felt like coming home. I knew that that was really where I wanted to be. As a native New Yorker who'd never lived any further west than Ohio, I was like, Kansas, what'll that look like? But when I got there, I loved it. And it was the university, my department, everybody was so supportive when I came in. They remained great colleagues all the way through my career there. At the time that I was hired, the provost was a veterinarian, which was really interesting to see. He was an equine surgeon, Jim Kaufman. He was provost for 20 years, which no one is ever provost for 20 years anymore. So yeah, so it was just a really great place to build my faculty career.
I wonder if somehow that got in your subconscious, that a veterinarian research background, specialty, whatever, you could get up to the leadership at a university, because it sounds like you transitioned to teaching and leadership and administration. You kind of
I
transitioned
think
up
that
there.
didn't hurt. I'll tell you the story of how I kind of got into administration. I think you can tell I just love the career that I have. And as I got to Kansas State and I started interacting with the students that I taught, I realized that many of them came from backgrounds where they never even had the chance to think about a non private practice career. They never had really been exposed to public health or lab animal medicine or doing research or working for industry. And, I had that opportunity before I got to vet school. And I wanted them to have that opportunity while they were in the early years of vet school in case someone else had the same spark that I did. And so it was when all of the veterinary research immersion programs were just starting. And Kansas State was very, helpful to me in allowing me to build a program there to immerse veterinary students in non-practice careers through a summer experience and ultimately a year-long experience. And I had to put together the money for that myself. And I did it by getting money from National Institutes of Health and from the Morris Animal Foundation, from drug companies. What was Merck, and then Merck Mariel, and then ultimately Pfizer was a partner, and then from grateful clients, who were willing to sponsor a student in honor of a pet whose life may have been positively impacted by clinical service. And so I put together a really good program. And Provost Kaufman, the veterinarian, watched me do this. And as he neared retirement, he said, I think you should, you have really good administrative skills because you were able to build this program. Did you ever think about being an administrator? And I'm asking you because there's this program for faculty members who might want to do administration to go for a year fellowship and shadow somebody who's an administrator and figure out if it's what they want to do. And it was kind of at a good place in my career. I was in between grants. Um, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it. And I asked the folks working in my lab, what do you think? And they, spoke it like it was. They were like, you tell us to try things. And if we don't like it, all you do is learn. And now you're being given that opportunity and you got to try it because what's the worst thing that could happen? You learn this isn't for you. And so I was like, okay, that is what I tell you. And now you're telling me. And so I spent a year in an administrative fellowship at the University at Buffalo and found out I really, really liked research administration. And that was where I aimed my career. And then once I got to Northern Illinois, just through a series of events, I had the opportunity to become more broadly involved in university administration as a provost and then a president.
I love that. I love your lab coworkers throwing your advice right back to you
Yep,
at just
my
the
vet
right time.
students and my graduate students and my technician were all like, you got to be real. You got to walk the walk.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And congratulations. I'm sure that you influenced many students through a program like that. And those types of programs are now at other schools. So your program, and I've heard good things about Kansas State, your program was probably one of the first, and that's great.
We were in early, but also I will say there was a group of associate deans for research and really caring faculty members from all of the vet schools in existence who really came together, to help write grants. And you're at Michigan State, Vilma was one of those people. And so I just made a donation to her memorial fund. She was definitely in it from the beginning, along with John Baker, who was her mentor.
Yes, just had a memorial service for Vilma, so thank you for that toward her memory. And give you another big shout out here. You received a really big award that I didn't realize. You were Veterinarian of the Year
I
with the
was.
Association for Women Veterinarians. That must have felt like a big honor.
It was a huge honor. And I remember the day that my department chair at Kansas State brought me the packet to let me know that I had been nominated and reading what they said about me in the packet, what the letters my colleagues wrote. I always remember he had written a note on the cover page with purple ink. It was Kansas State. All our ink was purple. And I cried and a tear hit the page and it made the ink on his signature run. And I still have that nomination packet among my most treasured possessions.
Oh, it's a wonderful story. I have to ask you about another story. Um, there's a funny story in some article I read about you about line dancing when you were at NIU. And a student is trying to tell me this story.
So, like most people, I line dance fairly rarely, mostly at weddings. And every year at student events where we have a DJ or a band, someone inevitably starts to line dance. And they're always, I'm always willing to, join in. We're trying to get students at the new welcome picnic to bond with each other. And so I went up to Wobble on a line with a bunch of students, faculty, and staff. And I would have been fine, after a rotation, it all would have come back to me. But I think like as soon as I got up there, the student noticed probably that I was watching everybody else to refresh the steps and came up and she was like, I got ya. And then she's like, to the left, to the right, forward, back. And so I'm doing everything with her and I'm thinking, oh, she's being so kind to me because I'm the president and how nice of her. And then we finish and she introduces herself. She tells me her name. And then she says, "Are you a student here? Are you an older student?" And I said, "No, I work here." And she said, "Oh, well, it's really nice meeting you. I'm so glad we danced together." And I thought that was just the kindest thing. And I never really told her I was president because I just figured she'd figure it out later or not. So,
Or not, yeah, that's
yeah.
right. I love that. You're such a heart for students. It didn't matter. You just saw the student for who she was. I love that. So I noticed that another thing that I wanted to ask you about, you're on a couple boards. You're on the Brookfield Zoo Board of Directors. You're also on the DeKalb Agricultural Heritage Association. So are you on those boards because you're president of NIU, or is that your veterinary insight or a combination?
So, the DeKalb Area Agricultural Heritage Association, which we call DAHA for short, DeKalb, Illinois is kind of at the junction of, like, it's peri-urban. I mean, you're still almost at the border of Chicagoland, but it's not quite suburban, but it's not yet rural. We have a lot of cornfields, but we also have some large industry here. And it's historically a place of agricultural innovation. Barbed wire was invented here. DeKalb Ag, the first genetically manipulated pigs are from here. And so, there's this history of agricultural innovation and a desire across our community. And NIU is obviously a large employer in the community to keep fueling that heritage. So we did things like work together to attract Syngenta's North American Innovation Center. We try to make sure that we are staying on top of inventions and advances in precision agriculture or sustainable ag practices. And so I'm really on that board because I'm NIU's president and because I bring an educational perspective, our students' perspective, and it's helpful to have some knowledge of agriculture. I think that the Brookfield Zoo Board, definitely my veterinary background is one of the things that made that a great match for me, and it's something that I'll continue to do after I'm not NIU's president. And one of the things that I learned right after I joined the Brookfield Zoo Board is a student who I taught in the 90s is one of the major consulting veterinarians on um, specialized theriogenology and zoo reproduction basically. And I think it's so funny because I can remember this student. I remember her papers because like she was a really great student. She always got like the highest grade in the class, and I think it's so funny that we have this connection.
I love that. Well, we are so proud to have you as part of the profession with your presidency at NIU. I have some lightning round questions. You ready for
Okay.
these? All right. What's the best and worst advice you were given as you were building your career?
I think the best advice, and I got it from my mom and many other people, was learn from your mistakes. Embrace failure as a learning opportunity. And the worst advice I ever got was blend in, try not to stand out.
What book would you recommend to any of us to read?
I'm a big fan of Frances Fry. She's like an organizational psychology professor at Harvard, and she's done a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos and essays on trust. And there's a compilation of essays on trust that leads with hers. And I think the book is just called On Trust. But if you look up Frances Fry, anything she writes, I'm always very interested in. I think trust is so fundamental to everything we try to do as professionals, regardless of our profession. And I really like the way she talks about building trust and restoring trust.
That's amazing. And trust is such a big part of a veterinary client relationship, too. But you're right, every workplace needs that. All right, last question. What's the next fun trip you have planned, or better yet, in addition, is where should we all make sure to go?
Well, I have been to the Arctic and the Antarctic with the NIU Alumni Association, and those were absolutely amazing trips. This summer, I have my vet school reunion, a big one coming up, my 40th vet school reunion, and I'll be going there. And then my husband and I'll be traveling with our children, well, our daughter and her husband, who accompanied us to the Arctic and the Antarctic. We'll be taking more of a ground trip, but we'll be doing Alaska, where I've never been, and it's been on the bucket list.
Oh, yes, we should all go to those places. Well, we are so proud to have you as a veterinarian be president of such a great university as Northern Illinois. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. This has been a ton of fun.
Thank you for listening to Extraordinary Vets, where every career tells a story.